Welcome to a very special OG episode where I have with me today my two fellow founders of the Trending in Ed podcast. I'm joined today by Brandon Jones, who's the CEO of Triad. Brandon, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here with you and Dan. Feels like old times new again.
Exactly. Old times new again, which equals new times with Dan. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. Thanks for having me back, Michael. It is good to be here.
Dan Strafford, who's really got us all started way back in the day in podcasting back in 2016. You were already a podcasting OG in 2016, and that's almost 10 years ago. So good on you. The crazy thing about podcasting is it's still kind of new. Folks still feel like it's cutting edge and new. So here we are.
It does feel like it's to be a politician today, you need to have a podcast. So maybe I should just run for office and bring it all full circle.
Let's do it. You heard it here first. I don't know if that was an announcement, but that was certainly something. Maybe we could get started quickly. We'll get into more of the history of the show, what you guys are doing and seeing since then. But maybe just starting with you, Brandon, and picking up with you, Dan. What have you been up to? How do you want to catch folks up on who you are and what you're doing in life?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I was looking back, I think the last time we got this group together was in October of 2023. So It's been a minute, but those minutes largely been spent doing the same thing I was doing back then. So I'm still the CEO of Triad, as you introduced me. Triad, the three prongs of Triad for those video watchers, not just the audio listeners coming at you through my webcam, education, community, and career resources, all specifically for mental health professionals, students, professionals, universities, and organizations.
Yeah.
We don't try to be everything or something for everybody, but we try to be a lot of things for this specific population. It's a space that's behavioral health, mental health, and substance use, a space I've learned my way into over the last, coming up on 6 years here now. It's really important to me personally and has been really rewarding professionally. Got a lot of thoughts to share on the mental health and substance use space more generally, but excited to be here at Triad and excited to be here again, talking to the two of you.
Yeah, it's been a crazy 6 years to be involved in anything, but specifically in mental health over that period, because it does feel like there have been some mega trends surrounding mental health that I know you've talked about in your appearances since 2019, but I'm excited to get a little more in there with you. And then as if mental health and leadership were not enough, we have Dan, who's still producing new media, kind of on the cutting edge there. Can you catch us up on what you've been up to?
I'm just glad you didn't do the mental health transition directly into me, but still doing, a lot of live virtual work at my current job, sales enablement. So a little bit of a different learning path and who we're talking to in what I'm doing, but still video production, audio production, and still utilizing Zoom now 7 or so years later since finding it many years ago, using other platforms as well, but really trying to find ways to reach the learner where they are, right? Still that same old conversation that we've had for so many years of how to get the right information from the right person at the right time. Personally, same situation, hustling on the side hustles, keeping up to date on video and audio production when I can, and still learning mostly through my children as they teach me each and every day.
Right. And you were a fantasy sports podcaster. Is that still part of your universe?
It's part of my universe. I don't do it nearly as much as I used to. I got back into daily fantasy podcasting to start the Major League Baseball season. So I've been doing a little bit more, this year. So sporadic, but I find it's just a way for me to process the information if I want to play the game that day. So I'm able to sort of talk through what I'm seeing and then make plays later on the day. So I'll release something to the 7 to 10 people who listen to it on a regular basis.
Well, there you go. Yeah, well, talking cures is part of what podcasts are about. It's certainly part of what you're doing, Brandon, in terms of therapy and having someone you can talk to. Any kickoff thoughts, maybe, just as we start the conversation? What was your prep like going in? I know I sent some notes out last night, but since we're used to doing this, we did over 200 episodes together over the years. I feel like we're all assuming the muscle memory and old rhythms will kick in, but maybe starting with you, Brandon, what was your prep like? What were you thinking about heading in?
Yeah, well, one, I listened to a handful of episodes from the back catalog, focusing specifically on the episodes that the three of us did together, because those featured me, and I really wanted to hear me.
Yeah.
But in case you see, Mike, a spike in your downloads.
Yeah, that's good. I was wondering where they came from. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Mash that like button. So I listened to, I guess, the first recorded episode, first available.
Right, because
still
there's the
episode.
lost
Yep.
episode. Our first 30
Right.
episodes are lost.
There are the lost
yeah.
episodes. Yeah. So the first one available was the March Madness trends from 2017. Listen to one of our episodes on Elon Musk, and boy, do I have thoughts about that.
Yeah.
Listen to a couple of episodes on the Gartner hype cycle
Yeah.
and some future trend spotting. So one of the things you asked us to think about coming into this recording was, what did we get right? What did we get wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we did pretty well. And one thing just the top of mind, one of the things I think we got real right was Dan. Just listening back, Dan, I felt at the time, but I'm just reminded of it. Like you were, as Mike said, you were a podcast professional before we showed up in a studio. And I think you did a great job of hosting and being a member of the triumvirate. You gave us some space to let us cook at times, but it felt more professional than, no offense to you or me, Mike, than it would have been otherwise. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And it was a long way of saying thank you, Dan. So I appreciate you. I think beyond the three of us, and I think we all contributed, but I think that we were talking about a lot of the right things. As I think about, we were talking about AI in 2017 that we had been talking about for years, and obviously talking about Elon Musk, talking about some ways of learning, some emerging trends on that I think are still relevant today. So I give us credit for that. It was fun. Like it wasn't onerous to do those reflections and musings and amusing banter with the three of us. It was good. Just long way of saying thanks to both of you. It was a really good trip down memory lane. And I was actively engaged by the subjects we were talking about then, even still.
Yeah. And we'll want to get back into some of those in a bit. How about you, Dan? Any reflections, any thoughts if you were prepping?
Shocker, for once, I did in fact prep. But I think going back through and talking about some of the things Brandon hit on, I think even this, if you think 2017 pre-pandemic, right? Pre all of the things we learned and where podcasting really took that extra turn on the crank, we were already talking virtual. We were talking about how people learn in distance models and how they learn at home, and how one of the episodes I just scrolled through was we had a long discussion on smartphones in the classroom, which has become more and more part of the news this year in New York City, here where I live in Waltham, Massachusetts. It's becoming more and more prevalent. So I think we were on top of the trends. And Mike, you did a great job of studying how to be on top of trends, not just what were the trends, but how to stay ahead, talking to Rohit, talking to different trend identifiers out there and really understanding. And I think that set the stage for the conversations. So I think that really helped really send the message of where this show could go. And what's great about that back catalog is it still plays. Like it still has conversations that are very important today. And personally, I didn't forget, but going back and seeing the Game of Thrones series of episodes, those were great conversations. Mm-hmm. And, we talk a lot on this show in the past about zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And of the time, I don't know that there is anything bigger. And the trends have happened since then.
Yeah.
But to get back in that mindset of how big that show was and how much fun it was to come in and digest what you had just watched by talking to two friends and colleagues was just such a different time in how podcasts worked and how we worked in doing the show.
Yeah. I still think of it as, 2019 is the end of the before times.
Right. Yep.
And I think our podcast Run Together kind of encapsulates the before times. And it was like, we didn't realize it necessarily at the time, but it was sort of a golden age of just kind of like psychological ease to some extent, where we were all able to collectively lean into things like Game of Thrones. And then even Elon Musk, which is probably worth talking about perhaps next, is, we had many conversations about sort of the myth of Elon, which was very prevalent at that time before he broke bad, I guess, in the collective consciousness, although he has a lot of people who are still big fans. But at the time, we were kind of obsessed with the breadth of his innovation companies, ranging from SpaceX to Tesla to Neuralink and the Boring Company. And we would talk about all of them, and the fact that one guy was running all that certainly captivated our futurist imaginations. There was even an empty seat in our whisper booth that we referred to as the Elon Musk chair. Thoughts on we were kind of Musk fanboys before Musk fanboys became a thing. And then, at least in terms of what the show produced, pretty quickly exited that over time. But, there was a lot there. Certainly was a lot to talk about. He captured our imaginations for sure. Thoughts on the Elon Musk coverage that we did over the years?
we were on it, whether or not the feelings we had for him at the time were how we feel today.
Yeah.
I think we saw the futurist mentality he had, and why he is still a voice for some people today is the way he approaches things, the way he sees the world. And I think we saw that. I think I haven't listened to the whole catalog again, but I think we trended with him. We saw the arc and we saw things that were happening. Currently, all politics aside, it is now thinking back, that's probably too many companies for one person to run.
Adding Twitter may have been the straw that broke that South African camel's back, you know.
You look at his tweeting, like the 23 hours a day he's tweeting, that feels like it's too much. I'm no mental health expert, but I think that might be too much. Again, it was of the times and it's still pertinent today, right?
Yeah.
It was of the times and good conversations and being able to think of, okay, what does this mean? Well, how does this play? What happens next?
Right. And we were trying to figure out how it played in the world of education, which interestingly, he hasn't really, like he landed in social media and politics. I don't think any of us were really necessarily anticipating the Twitter acquisition and then that leading to where it led. But,
no,
you know, more the cutting edge technology and how that might impact consumer trends, life in America, life in the world, and then specifically how it might affect education. You know, Brandon, you were our resident Neuralink volunteer.
Still am.
Still are. Okay. So I was curious. That was one question I wanted to make sure got answered on the call today.
Right into the brainstem, baby.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on our Musk years?
Yeah, it feels a little musky, sort of thinking back on it. Like Elijah, Elon never showed up the chair that we kept for him. That was a great disappointment, thinking back. You know, it's interesting. I think, and I want to have maybe a little extended conversation about a book that I read earlier this year that's been pretty influential on my thinking, not related to Elon Musk. But I think that, you know, multiple things can be true at the same time. So regardless of what you think about Doge or Dogecoin or, you know, some of Elon's personal habits and preferences, the expansive thinking that we were sort of taken with then is still true. And one of the things that I was thinking, just in listening to that first of the episodes that I listened to in prep for this, which was from 2017, about the way he approaches thinking. This is where we talked about he's reading 2 books a day and, you know, since he was a kid, thinking about how that systems thinking can move laterally across subjects, domains. And the language that we were using at the time, I think that was his language, was sort of the parts of a tree. Which, by the way, like, I want to go back and just get more credit for my "Don't Miss the Metaphorist" for the trees, because I feel like that's got us some
there's
wah-wahs.
gold
I want
in
to
the
run that
early,
one back.
Yeah.
But I think when you're thinking about that, you know, and there is some use of, because he owns as many companies or owns as many companies as he does, he's able to use pieces sort of interchangeably across them. But I think that's interesting. The DeepSeek, this is only sort of tangentially related, but it is. That was started as a stock picking program, right? And so the way that you approach some of these big problems, whether it's autonomous cars or if it's space travel, or if it's, you know, linking, downloading information, being able to manipulate human brains, the systems thinking approach, some of the same skills I think are more cross applicable than otherwise. And so it doesn't surprise me that Elon, who is a polymath, regardless of what you think he is beyond that, has been able to take that kind of approach. And I think I can hold a space for that in my heart, even if I don't appreciate some of the expressions of some of the other things, because I would love for us to be inspired to be as culturally, to be as learning oriented and expansive in thought as he has been.
Yeah.
So two things can be true at once is the short way of saying that, to the long way I just said it.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I'd say, like, what I'm disappointed about now is I don't feel like anybody's capturing the positive aspect of that kind of imagination that he was tapping into. The first principle stuff, I think, is still relevant and it's still kind of popping. It's still something that I use as like a filter where, like, if you get down to the fundamentals, what are we actually looking at? And if you think about whether it's connecting brains to technology or reusing the same rockets that you're shooting into space, like, those are concepts that, you know, the challenge is really in the execution of it. But it does seem like some new breakthroughs on those fronts have been happening. The thing that perhaps I'm questioning, and I had Mike Yates from Teach for America's Reinvention Lab on the panel in Austin, South by a little while back. And he was talking about, you know, working with folks like this, so like he's worked, with SpaceX and others doing their workshops and teaching. And he was making the point that when you're talking to Elon Musk or a Mark Zuckerberg, they're actually thinking about where do we need to be in 50 years? Like their sort of scope of focus is completely different from ours. And then he said something interesting too, where like all of your questions about education will be answered through the lens of, well, we're going to have to colonize Mars. And then let's back up from there. And what I find surprising, I guess, is that there's Musk's grand vision of the future, but I don't see enough alternatives. And I think that's where, maybe we need to challenge ourselves and others to kind of put new ideas out there that are as imaginative and as sort of influential in their thinking, but perhaps are more terrestrial in their orientation, where I have seen more people push back and say, for example, the Earth, even in 50 years, the Earth is going to be so much more inhabitable than Mars. Why are we chasing sort of that outcome? I don't know what you guys think about that, but I thought that was sort of an interesting perspective because, I felt like we saw him as almost like a futures thinker who had some positive vision for where the world was heading. And I feel like things have perhaps gone a little darker.
For sure. I think what I appreciate about what you just said is the aspirational nature of what Elon Musk may do, right?
Yeah.
And Elon Musk in the setting this grand vision or this grand idea and trying to chase it. And I do think that's been lost in current events and what's happened. I do just personally, the whole Mars or spend that money here, fix the planet we're on already, but that's a different story for a different day. But I do think, to your point, the big thinkers, the grand thinkers, allow all of us to sort of come along for the ride and think differently about things and see where things could go. And as I've gotten older and hopefully wiser, is understanding that you don't necessarily have to get there. It's thinking through how you might, thinking through and testing the theory and getting to at least having the ideas. That is so important. I do think, to your point, that's been lost in his sort of where we saw him 5-6 years ago to where we don't really have someone doing that in that positive nature with positive feedback for that person.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what both of you have said. I wonder, and this is extemporaneous offered here because I have not thought about this to date, but I wonder if the Mars project, because it is extraterrestrial, like the biggest benefits to that from that project will be felt terrestrially, right? So if you think that we need to get to Mars and it's the time horizon is much shorter than 50 years on this particular case, what would need to be true for us to get to make that happen? And then what would become true by what has been made possible, by those things that would need to be true to get to Mars.
Yeah.
And, the pace of innovation, the investment into things like artificial intelligence and, just like bioengineering things like that may have greater benefits. I think the benefits almost surely will be felt more by the humans at home than the humans on Mars, actuarially speaking. But also, I wonder if, saying we have to get to Mars in 10 years forces sort of a focus and a resource deployment that would actually yield more benefits than if we said we have to improve, put more efforts against climate change in the next 10 years. That, the stated goal is actually not where the greatest benefit is felt. So it's interesting. And I think about the space program, the NASA space program from getting to the moon the first time, which, by the way, it's just crazy to think that was done pre-internet. Think of all the benefits that have come, terrestrially from that, with this sort of singularity of focus and resources put against it. Pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned singularity, which is going to set up my segue here. So thank you for that. But, the level of capital that has to be deployed to do some of these incredible things is another important point. And, there's a chilling effect on investment right now because of tariffs and the current global economic climate. But, big bets kind of need to happen. And then there's benefits across the board when those big bets are actually made. And when it comes to AI, that's been a big bet really since, the fall of 22 throughout 23 now, we're 2.5 years into the LLM boom, which has resulted in a major increase in compute and a lot of the processing power and data centers that are necessary to continue to develop that. That to me seems like the more proximal example of that's like our current space age, is this major investment in AI. And ultimately, perhaps that leads to the singularity, artificial general intelligence, which is something that we touched on because we were covering AI, but we weren't as obsessed with it as perhaps Silicon Valley is today. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Because I've heard talk of the singularity happening. I think Kurzweil's original prediction was somewhere around 2029-ish. So if we, forecast forward, say 3.5 years from now, it'll be 2029. AI is something we've talked about a lot. Any read on where you think AI will be? We talked about the Mars shot as opposed to the moon shot. What about the AI shot? What are you thinking about that one?
We have been talking about, and obviously AI is something that's been talked about for 70 years. We've been talking about it for almost 10. I don't think we were talking about AGI, right? So I think that's like become more in the parlance, at least for me, over the last half decade or so. Feels like it's out of my ken to say like whether we will hit that, hit that pin in terms of time or in terms of that singularity. It does definitely feel like, we talked about AI for X and not the artist formerly known as Twitter, but the AI for everything.
Right.
It does feel like that is fast forwarding to 2029. It will just be much more prevalent. Whether we get to, generative AI, truly, that singularity moment, I don't know, but I guess I wouldn't be betting against it.
Right. And it's also like, what does that mean for us? If AI is our dance partner, that's where, I think I've done the old Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, like who's leading and who's in heels going backwards. It does seem like the dance partner does influence who you are, and how the AI, as it gets smarter and smarter, is influencing how we feel about humanity and what we understand about humanity. Is, I think, an interesting counterpoint. Quick update from ASU GSV. There's the ASU GSV proper conference, which is at the Grand Marriott out there. And then the convention center is where they started their AI show, where it was last year. But this year, the AI part of the AI show was at the far end of the convention center. And in between the education venture capital conference and the AI conference was a neurology conference. And that was striking to me. I know that's kind of closer to your new space, Brandon, but it was striking to me. And I've been thinking about this more lately. I've been talking to more neuroscience people. We've always loved talking about brains on the show, but it does feel like as the AIs get better, it's going to drive more focus on us. And I think when we're focused on humanity, it's also why behavioral health, I would imagine, Brandon, is a huge growth area for us, because I feel like we probably have been underinvesting in it, under-aware of its negative impacts. And then sadly, smartphones, social media, Jonathan Haidt, all that stuff is sort of causing our psychological well-being to be a little bit shook. And then parallel to that, this AI thing is happening. Thoughts on how those two can kind of interplay? Because I've heard both sides. I've heard that AI will be driving our loneliness and mental health epidemic, but I've also heard that it can be and should be part of the solution. Thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I think it is probably a little bit of both. And I mean, it's already being used as part of the solution. So an example I like to give is using AI to process. The thing it is best at today is processing large data sets, like much better than humans, right?
Unstructured data too.
Yeah. And so especially when you think about compiling patient notes from a session, from an hour of talk therapy, or particularly doing quality assurance, evaluating talk therapy, for example, you would kind of need to spend a 1-to-1 hours ratio. Maybe you could listen at 1.5x, but like nearly 1-to-1 hours ratio of listening back to talk therapy to evaluate it. And the AI can do that today in a way that is, just immeasurably better than humans.
Pretty much
and
instantaneous, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And is doing that. So, there's a couple of groups that we're working with. Elios is one that does AI-enabled patient notes generation. Listen, LYSSN is one that is doing, running all of the talk therapy hours back through it to generate insights on therapist performance. So I think it will make things better. And I think that things like, I think about the 988, that's the National Suicide Hotline, that's the mental health version of 911.
Yeah.
This is kind of a sobering note, but I went to a session in November of last year in 2024, where the directors of 988 were talking about their 93% call answer rate. That's up a ton from 70% where it was before moving to 988. But that's like 7% of people who are inspired. And it's 2025, baby. Like, who wants to call anybody about anything
right
ever? Right. And so that's 7% of people who didn't get an answer. I think AI can help with that too. And helping triage getting people who are having, an acute mental health episode from someone who just needs, maybe someone to talk to.
Right.
So I guess I probably shake out on the more hopeful side of it than not. But certainly there's very good literature on the impact that social media particularly has had and smartphone usage has had on teens, particularly girls. So it's not all rosy, but I guess I hope that it shakes out on the positive side.
Well, it makes sense in that you're closer to a lot of the people who are trying to solve some of these problems. And I have a nice effect. Roger Spitz, friend of the show, and I've been bringing it up a lot, a futurist. He has this thing called the Black Mirror effect, which is that we tend to think about the dystopian futures that technology will cause, when in reality, lots of the things that technology enables are positive. And I think that's probably a fair point, although the exponential nature of a lot of these new and emerging technologies is what's scary, in that if they go off the rails, there may not be an elegant, graceful failover scenario to kind of get stuff back on the rails.
I was reading an article on NPR the other day about a AI mental health chatbot that I think was from Dartmouth many years ago, now is starting to get out in the world, and the training it went through with clinicians and all that. And I think I am one who goes negative first when it comes to AI. Like I go to Black Mirror, I go to dystopian movies. But what I've recognized just in my day-to-day is that it is just like any other tool. It's just like any other technology advance. You can change with it and understand it and learn from it, or you can rage against it, right? And you can not understand it, not see its utility and its way forward. I think AI, from a learning perspective, and what it does, Mike, you mentioned before, to the human side of things, to where does critical thinking go? Where does how we talk about grit and perseverance and, the idea of teaching kids to persevere through not understanding something or not learning something? Those are questions I have, but that doesn't make me feel like we should not be chasing this technology and really leaning into what it can do. I'm using the chat GPTs of the world for work. I'm using Notebook LM. And I don't know if you've used their podcasting feature yet, Mike, on Notebook LM. Creepy, but still delivering something. Is it, quote unquote, perfect? Is it great? No, but it's a working tool for me. Overall, I think human beings hate change. I think we're afraid of change, especially change we don't control. And so I think that's really where the back of mind with AI personally and with my kids and in my neighborhood and in school system here, trying to help people see that there's more benefits right now that can be really unleashed if we use it in a proper way.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, AI literacy, like we're all parents and trying to figure out what's the right developmentally appropriate way to introduce any kind of technology. It does feel like we're at a new phase in light of the awareness of perhaps some of the negative impacts of mobile phones and social media. So I'm a little bit hopeful that perhaps some of the awakenings from your neck of the woods, Brandon, have kind of permeated into the collective consciousness so that maybe we're getting smarter about how we use technology. But to me, the stakes are extremely high, where either the AI technology should help us narrow gaps, increase access, reach that 7% that you're talking about, Brandon, the folks who otherwise wouldn't have had access to services. They will be able to get access to those things through these new tools, or perhaps these tools become more available to those of us who have access to them, and it becomes a little bit more gap widening and sets up, these starker divisions that, perhaps we're seeing even politically play out nowadays. Education is something we haven't actually gone specifically into in the conversation. And while I still have you guys here, I'd love to get a little bit of your perspective on that. Maybe a combination of parenting and then thinking about next generations, because we all have offspring. But yeah, thoughts?
I feel like I do need to make the obligatory practice reference when discussing AI. It
Please.
just needs to be said.
Yeah.
We're talking about practice. I'm caught on offspring here and the idea of where we go from here. I said it before, and I think from an education perspective, from an AI perspective, from even an Elon Musk perspective, I have started to learn so much more as I've gotten older, and I've started to have less and less a secure opinion of what I know.
Yeah.
And so I think all of this right now for me personally is trying to be a better learner. We talked about lifelong learning so many times in the past. So the spur of your question is really taking a step back for me and trying to be much more self-aware in all of these discussions, even talking to you guys. Like, I don't know what I don't know. The AIs of the world can fill that in. There are pieces that I'm trying to figure out. Education is a huge part of that. So I'm trying to just formulate the thought really and have it be more of a conversation with myself. Mental health has been big for me over the past few years, and really being more self-aware in that way with these sort of discussions.
Yeah, I think of that similarly too. And you're a great example of someone who's always been learning and using new things, like new tools. You're one of the people I look to, Dan, to kind of figure out what's new, what's fire, as the kids
The
say.
new hotness.
The new
hotness.
Exactly. But it does seem like we have to start teaching at a very early age. My son is 6, but it's like, I'm still learning. You're still learning. You will always be learning. And this construct of like, there's your learning years and then there's your professional years is not true anymore. And lifelong learning is a reality. We've all kind of experienced it for the now 6 or so years since we've no longer done the show together. Brandon, how about you on the education side? What are your thoughts?
I'm holding 2 directions here on this. So I'm bullish on AI's impact on education in general. One of the, again, from one of the shows that I listened to is, I think at that point on the Gartner hype cycle was democratization of AI. And I do think AI is going to be like electricity. It's going to be something that maybe not everybody has, but the vast majority of us are able to benefit from.
Yeah.
I think I'm more bearish on educational institutions today. So I'm bullish on AI and, technology in general helping to educate, today's learners. And I don't just mean children, I mean all of us. I think about, Mike, I think you just had, or maybe it was this time last year, had an episode on Trending and Ed about absenteeism. That's a real problem, if like, not sure that the learning happening in schools is great, but I'm sure that the school learning anyway isn't happening when you're not there.
Right.
There's all of these maybe existential threats to higher ed from a lot of the, I will say, what feels to me to be not purely motivated or justified cuts coming from the current administration. Billions of dollars, $500 million for many of the leading research universities in the United States. I think about the cuts to the DOE, which, include things like the center that does educational standards measurement, right? And I'm a big believer you can't measure, you can't manage it. So we may be flying a little blind with all these interventions. So I don't know that disruption, like very fundamental disruption, would be bad for education. We've been, we had a lot of conversations about how the K-12 model is, I'm generalizing and hand waving here, but is more or less the same that it was in the 1950s. The value prop of higher ed, particularly of some investments in a traditional 4-year college, are changing. Well, maybe disruption would be good, but I guess if I were thinking long term, I'd be probably bullish on how we can leverage tools to help educate, but bearish on the current institutions.
And maybe the AI is what disrupts it, right? Like, are we at that inflection point where this technology change does just enough to really shift the way people perceive it? Again, personally, it's looking at the conversations we've had, which I learned a lot from both of you, from the Brewer Saxbergs of the world, that lots of people have talking to my kids of, not everyone takes the same path forward, and not everyone gets on that path the same way. And so all 3 of my kids are different, and really understanding that my standards and what my wife would have wanted and what our parents would have wanted are all non-consequential, really, when we get to the point of what happens next. And trying to, again, on this sort of personal level, you think globally, act locally sort of idea, is talking to my kids about, hey, you might not go to a 4-year college. You might go to community college for a year, then transfer somewhere else. You might apprentice somewhere. And all of that's fine, because in the end, you'll be 43 working in sales enablement when you thought you would be in video production. Yeah, like it's just trying to learn from that and teach my kids and hope. I do believe that, like, working with them and working with their friends and talking through these big ideas is so important to the broader ecosystem of education and learning and what happens next.
Yeah.
Speaking of big ideas, just to maybe tee up some conversations for next time, and would love to get this gang back together.
Yeah, semi-regular. Let's do it.
So the two things that I've alluded to just very quickly. So one is hope and fear. You know, I've been thinking a lot about that and doing a little, you know, just of my own exploration around it. And those two emotions are physiologically related. Like there are this, like we humans demonstrate the same anticipatory physiological responses, you know, vasodilation, sweaty palms when we're feeling those things.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you know, part of hope is that the fear that your hopes won't come to pass.
Right.
Part of your fear is the hope that your fears won't come to pass. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that the word that I've been landing on lately is courage. Like you need to have courage to operate there, because both fear and hope are not active. They're often very passive. And I feel like courage requires one to, in that sea of uncertainty and that sort of hope, fear soup, to take some action. And so, you know, I feel like that applies whether we're talking about education, we're talking about parenting, we're talking about navigating the political world that we're in today. That's a word I'm trying to both hold on to for myself and proselytize around a little bit. And then I mentioned a book. I just want to give this quick plug. So I read a book earlier this year, What's Our Problem by Tim Urban.
Okay.
Which for listeners, watchers, if you don't have it, I would encourage getting the hard copy of it, not the audiobook, because there's lots of delightful illustrations in it.
Yeah.
But the framing of this, I have found it's like pretty fundamental to how I've been thinking of late, which is recasting the sort of left-right political spectrum of thinking from the language that Tim Urban uses. It's not liberal on the left, it's progressive on the left. So progressive and conservative, neither of which are inherently good or bad.
Yeah.
So casting it from a left-right dynamic to a top-down dynamic, and systems of thinking from primitive mind to higher mind. And it gives these four, this is like a 600-page book I'm trying to do in 1 minute here, but these four ways of thinking like a scientist, thinking like a sports fan, thinking like a lawyer, thinking like a zealot, where like a scientist seeks truth.
Yeah.
A sports fan roots for an outcome, but wants whatever to happen.
Yeah.
A lawyer is paid to get to a specific outcome, and a zealot can only accept one answer.
Yeah.
And to really push us to think like scientists, to operate in idea labs instead of echo chambers, you know, to resist when lots of primitive minds get together. He calls it a golem, to resist these golems. And there's golems on both sides. And I think as you reflect on that, you'll see then that maybe you're even participating. And that was my experience. And so I'm trying, as I think, to navigate through what feels to me to be very fraught times, to hold on to that systems thinking top down and to focus on courage. That's how I'm sort of prosecuting my moment in time that I'm in.
Yeah.
It's not easy. I don't do it well all the time.
Yeah. And you've at least crystallized to the point that you can talk about it in 5 minutes, which is useful for others, because then it gives people something to chew on, which is what these conversations are all about. It's interesting, you know, you're mentioning, I think I've been talking about bravery with my son, because he talks about, you know, he's 6, he's scared. And I'm like, you know, being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing something even though you're scared. And I think that's where courage is, you know, cut from the same cloth.
For sure.
And then the other thought, just reflecting back on some of your thoughts, perhaps, Brandon, on AI helping sort of the individual paths around education, but not necessarily having that shared communal space of the school, the classroom, that is so foundational. If COVID taught us anything, you know, we've now fully bounced back, I think, where people just seek out ways to be physically proximal to other humans. And that's where I'm curious how AI might be able to help us formulate new and better ways to connect with other people, and then perhaps connect with them either in formats like this, in Zoom and podcasts, but also physically being in the same space, shoulder to shoulder with others, is pretty foundational. We got a lot to chew on, and this was a nice warm up. So it sounds like there's interest in perhaps doing more of this as we progress. So, parting shots, closing thoughts from my two OG co-hosts here today.
It's funny you said shots. I was saying another round.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it all comes together. Brandon, I love the thought of courage and as the secondary to fear and hope, right? The action. I often talk to my girls about anger being the secondary emotion to fear or shame or those sort of things. And we can choose to not be angry. We can choose to be courageous. We can choose. I really like that framing of thinking moving forward. I think Brandon's used the word fraught. Mike, you've talked about the current climate. It's really easy to sort of bury your head in the sand and not worry about AI, not worry about politics, not worry about things. I think these conversations are great personally, but also hopefully people find them interesting and thought-provoking in a way that helps stay in it, stay part of it, and stay moving in whatever direction, right? Just stay moving. And I think that's so very important right now as we talk about loneliness and we talk about disconnection and we talk about these different things to stay connected in the ways you can.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this being together, the two of you, is just another good reminder of this, is that it's the humans that matter. Like most of us are more alike than not.
Yeah.
Most of our desires are very human in nature, right? Like there's some Maslow's hierarchy in there. There's just wanting to feel that sense of community, and whether that's in a school setting, in an office setting, or in this kind of setting with a couple of old friends. We're older than we were 9 years ago, I'll tell you that.
Sure.
But, I think that's the thing also that I try to reflect on is all of this, we have the time that we have, and we get to vote with our calendars. We get to vote with our presence. It's the humans that matter to me. And I think that's true for most folks. And so I think that is a unifying thought rather than a divisive one. So I go forward courageously, I hope. Again, not all the time, but with a sort of always on framing around that. I look forward to doing this again with you guys. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary.
I know. Maybe that's
we know
the
the
next
actual date?
was September of 16. Yeah. We got
9/1/2016 was our first
Look at
release.
that.
All right. There you go.
So I would propose let's get back together before the 10-year anniversary. What we then have to do, I feel like, something around 9/1/26, right?
Yeah. That sounds perfect. Absolutely. Thanks to both of you for coming back on. I'll include links to some of the OG catalog, maybe get a playlist going on YouTube for folks who want to just listen to the old school varietal, which is one of our finest. Like fine wine, those old episodes are mostly aging well, I think. And that's a credit to all three of us. So Dan Strafford, Brandon Jones, thank you so much for rejoining me on Trending in Ed.
Thanks, guys. Great to be with you.
Thanks, Mike.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. Subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.